NWSL, we are through 7 weeks of action, and we have seen a lot of different rotation in the goalkeeper position. We have seen some depth there. We've also seen some shallowness in that position and that role. And coming off of last weekend, Jane Campbell tied the NWSL record for saves in a regular season match at 12. For the Dash and the NWSL, that was a record. This is our reigning NWSL 2023 goalkeeper of the year. It is no surprise that she is tying and breaking records through the first 7 weeks of play. Now, also, we have to remember Houston gives up a lot of shots. And for her to make all these saves, there's an element of that to come through it. But she only concedes one against Kansas City. On the other side of this, we had 3 major goalie errors over the past weekend. Major. Kaylin Sheridan at San Diego Wave, Alyssa Nair at Chicago Red Stars, and
Yikes.
AD Franch in Kansas City. All 3 of these major errors from the top goalkeepers, arguably in the league. I would argue that number 1 Canadian goalkeeper, Kaylin Sheridan, number 1 United States goalkeeper in Alyssa Nair, and number 2 United States goalkeeper, AD Franch, all leading to a goal. This begs the question of what is happening with the goalkeepers in the NWSL right now, Sandra? What is happening? Is
It's
the
tough.
attacking that much better? Like, what can you explain to me?
Right? Is it a mix of both here? Look, when our producer Mark presented this to us, I was like, you know what, this can actually be kind of fun to talk about because I think you said it right there. Is it the goal scoring? I mean, look, we're seeing a lot of goals in NWSL week in, week out, highlight worthy. I mean, my goodness, we've got a freaking goal tracker for Kansas City Current as part of, one of the like little fun segments that we do with A3. So all of that's fun. Like who doesn't love a home run or a touchdown? Who doesn't want to see some dingers, right? We love goals. But at the same time, you and I particularly, we love to talk about defenses. We love to analyze goalkeepers. So in that aspect, it's been a little bit, I don't want to say disappointing because I'm not here to rag on the keepers, but it's been maybe underwhelming. And I think
Mhm.
part of this segment we were so excited to get into was because a stat like Golden Boot is just automatic. I don't want to say lock, but it's just an automatic figure that you can follow. We're seeing a lot of goals, in particular, some individual brilliant performances from players, and we are watching a very early and exciting Golden Boot race. So when we look on the other side of that, that had us with a bunch of question marks. We're like, who's actually taking an early look at that goalkeeper of the year finalist category and who's kind of presenting a case? And I think that's completely wide open at this
Yeah.
moment where we're looking at teams and how they're either 6, 7, or 8 weeks into their season. Is it enough, Lisa, to say, oh, it's still early days? Because it's not. I mean, for me, it's not. For me, we're
Yeah.
we're halfway to halfway. That's where we're at right now. So I don't know. I'm a
What
little
is that, a
confused.
quarter? Let's do some real math here,
Well, yeah,
Sandra.
a fake. Well, I was told there was going to be no math here, and here I am trying to do the fractions. Yeah, I guess we're about a quarter way through, depending on the club that you're looking at, right? But I think not only some of these errors that you pointed out, but these are like errors from like keepers that we are, are synonymous with like iconic goal
Mhm.
performances in net. So the fact that we are coming out off of a week where we can point out, 3 kind of top tier elite goalkeepers and
Right.
say, hey, like, what was the thought process behind that, or what was the thinking behind that? Maybe it was a good week for us to chat about this. So I don't know. For me, it's wide open. I think maybe it does have to do a little bit with the fact that we are seeing some really exciting, attacking sequences, for NWSL this year. But again, to sort of keep nitpicking at the points that you're making, some of those errors weren't exactly these like high flying, dynamic, classy finishes. My goodness, Alyssa Nayer's error was off of Tess Bodie's back. You
Yeah.
know, I mean,
I
tough.
I would even argue that in the Kansas City Houston match, Jane Campbell, yeah, congrats for making 12 saves, but the goal that Houston conceded to Temwa Shawinga was
Yeah,
like it was like moving through molasses.
yeah,
The ball was rolling so slow.
yeah.
It almost felt like it was an error. I mean, it wasn't necessarily, but I imagine Campbell watches that back and says, I should have that. I should have
Yeah.
that. or
Yeah.
defenders look and say, we should have stopped that from happening. It was just rolling so slowly into the goal. It's it makes the difference between goal scorers scoring absolute worldies and golazos on the weekend to some of these goals that are being scored as like, okay, no, that's an error. And
Yeah.
that the forward got lucky. Or, like Tess Bodie, she just got lucky. Right place, right time for the ball to ricochet off her back and go in the net.
Yeah, it was fun to hear her chat a little bit about it at the halfway point as well, or even she was just like, not the way, I score goals, but like we'll take it. Like there's a little bit of understanding where it's just like this
Right.
is so clear and obvious an error,
Exactly.
and so that's tough. And even gosh, even I would say even the equalizer for Houston and coming out of that same game, poor Ellie Wheeler coming in as a
Yeah.
substitute, right, for Haley May. So we're talking about a little bit of maybe a soggy pitch coming into play with the weather conditions, maybe some miscommunication on a sub coming back in,
I
but the
mean, there's a
positioning,
lot.
right, not
Right.
ideal.
Yeah,
Like,
there's a lot you could blame in that Houston Kansas City game, but we're circling the goalies in this segment, so we're just doing that. Well, I wanna ask about this because I've had the privilege and the pleasure of working in the NWSL and covering it since 2020, which is when I first started talking to coaches weekly before games about what's happening. And since 2020, certain coaches, not every single one, but majority of the coaches in the league have said, we have a goalkeeper 1A and 1B. We don't have a number 1 and we don't have a number 2. It is the smallest of margins that are separating our first string from our second string. And being a goalie in the NWSL is arguably one of the hardest positions because if you're in good form, you're going to keep rolling. And if you're not and the other goalie, the 1B gets an opportunity, they can just take it and run. This year, it doesn't feel as if there is as much competition between the quote first string and the second string goalie within these teams. When you look at across the board of the NWSL, there's not as much depth as there has been in years past, which could potentially be because of a lack of development in the position for the goalkeepers or a lack of experience, right? Once they get to the level, they sign a contract, they could be on a team for 2 to 3 years without seeing minutes, significant minutes. I should say that. With the Challenge Cup the last few years, that's when we often saw a goalkeeper rotation. And that was when opportunities for goalkeepers to get game minutes. We don't have that anymore. Every single game matters towards the regular season. I dug into this a little bit. OL Reign this year, they have split time with their goalkeepers, 4 matches and 4 matches for each Laurel Ivory and Claudia Dickey. That hasn't really happened elsewhere of the other 13 teams in the NWSL. Am I on to something here about, like, not having Challenge Cup games? Like, I don't know.
yeah,
Is there something here?
I think it's a fair shout. I mean, but I'm also curious of again, I think maybe it goes back to what I was kind of alluding to. Like, is this technically considered still early in the season? Is a quarter of a season still considered the early phase of the season? I mean, is we're looking right around the corner to like the Summer Cup.
I
Is
know,
that when we're going to see some,
some depth.
some differences there where in competition and in level, a little bit. I'm curious about that for sure. But I like how you went, kind of dug back into your beginnings of covering things and your conversations with coaches. Because you know what, even though I've been covering this for a little longer, I'm in 100% agreement with you on there. I love that framing because it's correct. If there's a 1A and a 1B, and I for some reason, like it just, I think back even to like 2016, like I think back to that Washington Spirit side that made it all the way to the final. My goodness, Steph LeBay was a starting goalkeeper for that team, but head coach Guevara was like, we're gonna split some time here because it was an Olympic year as well. So there was some rotation out with, balancing uh international duty for Canada and Kelsey Weiss getting starts for the Spirit as well. So they were a team that also rode two goalkeepers all the way to a championship final appearance. And we're talking about a time where Challenge Cup did not exist, where there
Right.
were not these kind of cup competitions in play for NWSL. So it's an interesting shout and stat
It's
for sure.
I mean, one of the questions that our producer Mark threw at us was like, "Okay, who needs a change at the position?" I think that's really hard for me to answer because I'm not watching
Yeah,
this quote second string 1B goalies in training, and we
yeah,
haven't seen them enough
exactly.
in practice. The only ones I can
Not
really
at this
speak
point in
to.
the league,
Right,
like you mentioned. Yeah,
exactly. And the only one I could really speak to is at Gotham, and the amount of depth that Gotham has in their goalkeeper position. They had Cassie Miller, who is a number one goalkeeper. She split time with AD Franch last year in Kansas City. She was starting. Now they bring in Katrin Berger, who seems to have taken over that role. They also have Michelle Betos. They also have Neely Martin. Can we add her to the list? But
Yeah. Need
there's
that
a lot of
goalkeeper
depth.
kit.
There's a lot of former starting goalkeepers at Gotham right now.
Yeah.
They're kind of hogging all the talent in the best way, right? Like
It
that's
might be
where
smart though. Like,
smart.
I mean, we're that's the question. It's like who needs a change? And you automatically look at Gotham is that example. Um, look, injuries are a real thing. They
No.
happen. We are watching Gotham having to manage that, deal with that in real time. And that is like at this point across all lines, and that includes that goalkeeper position. We both really liked when they made that free agency signing for Abby Smith. We thought that that was going to be a piece for them to build around, and she had an incredible 15-game run with them in her
Right.
first season, but she's been dealing with some injuries, right?
Right.
It made additional moves for Cassie Miller. Now we're seeing with AKB. So they're I appreciate that Gotham is looking long term. They're thinking chess, not checkers. They're like, we have to make moves. If you want to be competitive in this league, you have to have the bodies
Yeah.
essentially
Chestnut
across the
checkers. I
line.
don't know what that is. Adding that to my list to Google at the end of this show.
Yeah, I just am like, I don't know. Again, the string of games that we have to operate in front of us, like
It's small.
I don't know. It's small, and like like with Kansas City, I think for a while there where it's like, wow, look at this like very exciting team. They're unbeaten. They're probably the most exciting team in the league right now. But they concede goals, right? Like
Right.
that's the other stat for them. So then it's like, okay, well, does that mean that there should be a goalkeeping change? And there's also that sub question where it's like, not necessarily, maybe it's about what's happening in front of the goalkeeper right now. There's
Exactly.
also those
Yeah.
added layers as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you look at that in Houston, hands down, what's happening in front of Jane Campbell. All right, Claire Scott joining us live on YouTube. Claire, thanks for jumping in. You're posing a question for us. Hey, Claire says, "Hey, I've got a question for Lisa and Sandra. Who's the top goalkeeper in the league right now?"
Ooh,
I absolutely love this one. I
great.
think last week, I mean,
It's
Kaylin
week to week,
Sheridan
right?
at San Diego, yeah, it is week to week. Kaylin Sheridan at San Diego is incredible.
Yeah.
She is absolutely one of the best goalkeepers that this league has had and had the privilege of having play in this league. I also think Katie Lund has done a really good job this year to develop her game right growth from last year to this year for Katie Lund is she can now play with her feet and she's looking to build out of the back and she's looking to drive balls out of the back and find her sixes and Taylor Flint and Jalen Howe on the ball that is making her game elevated and it's changing for her. But there's also some slip ups and mishaps. Like it's hard for me to kind of judge that. It is a week to week thing. But I would say Sheridan and Katie Lund are my top ones right now. Sandra, what do you think?
Listen, we literally had an episode not too long ago where we played GM and we both were going after Kaylin Sheridan. So I'm 100% with you on that. I think Kaylin Sheridan is possibly the top goalkeeper in the league right now. But again, it's week to week because Claire, had you had asked me this question maybe a couple weeks ago, even a week and a half ago before North Carolina had a tough couple of
Right.
midweek games on the I would have said Casey Murphy because this was a team that was not necessarily conceding goals in the way that they did when they had that game against Orlando. They had 3 clean sheets. So I would say maybe Casey Murphy at that time. But coming off of this string of games on the road, it's like,
Yeah,
again,
she's
week to
dropped a
week,
little.
different form. So I would say Kaylin, I think in terms of we started this off saying like who is actually going to be in the running for goalkeeper of the year, and I think when it comes to finalists, if we had to pick like a 3 to 5, I would agree that Sheridan and Lund should be in that conversation. Perhaps Murphy and Nair to an
Mhm.
extent. Um, and I think if you're looking at bunch of saves for saving's sake, I guess maybe you include
Campbell.
Jane Campbell, but that's not always a happy stat when you're saying, look
Right.
how many saves this goalkeeper is making for our club. That is the number and stat where you look at other issues on the pitch. So
Like, could they have done for me, elements come into it, and I'm not saying Jane Campbell has done this, but, like, did they make a save where they parried it and kept the ball in play, and then they had to make another save when they initially, the smarter play would have been to parry it out of bounds or to grab onto the ball, or instead of punching it, could they have grabbed it? Those are like elements when you really get into the nitty gritty,
Yeah.
which my brain just goes there. So Claire,
Okay.
thank you for the question. We really
Thank you.
appreciate it. Anyone joining us live on YouTube, if you've got questions, drop them in the chat. Maybe we'll answer them, and it spurs a great conversation. So thank you. Shout out, Claire.